Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Heretic Hammer Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall, and this is my co-host, Dylan.
Hello, hello.
And today, start with a quote, a litany, if you will, an unbreakable litany. From iron cometh strength, from strength cometh will, from will cometh faith, from faith cometh honor, and from honor cometh iron. This is the unbreakable litany, and may it forever be so. This, Dylan?
So it's the Pacers, right?
What, the Indiana Pacers?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know. They won the finals last year?
I truly don't know in this moment. Was just making a joke.
Shit, I was going to make a second joke, but it was based on if they won or not. Did they win? Tell me.
Well, it sounds like somebody should have had more faith because faith leads to iron and iron leads to strength.
Unfortunately, they did not have
strength leads to more jokes.
They did not have this this unbreakable damn it. They did not have this unbreakable faith because they lost to the Oklahoma City Thunder. So no, it's not the Indiana Pacers. It's the Iron Warriors with their battle cry, iron within, iron without. A battle
so
cry.
they get the cool litany quote and they get a motto
That's right.
to go with it. These guys, wow.
They're all about iron.
Okay.
I mean, it's a battle cry, an ideology, just the Iron Warriors way of life. Iron within, iron without.
Frequent blood donors, these guys, right?
You know, in some regards, maybe. You could say so.
Maybe. In a matter of speaking.
Based on a couple of the things we will get to, yeah. Just in a different way of thinking about it.
Yeah. They just donate other people's blood to the air.
Yes. Also, other Space Marines, it's a whole thing. Anyway, big thing obviously now from, the Great Crusade to now, the Iron Warriors motto lives on along within them and within their Primarch, who is still, in a way, prevalent in the setting. I say in a way because he hasn't been super active. All of his activities generally since I guess technically the scouring post heresy, like before even Dorn and Gilliman, quote unquote, died. Gilliman the first time, Dorn, we don't know. But one way or the other, he is still alive, very much alive and very much kicking. And just waiting for his moment to, take part in the 42nd millennium.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the key of the Iron Warriors is, though, that theirs is a story, especially Perturabo's, of character growth, right? But in a way, it is somewhat true for all of the Iron Warriors. And there's, like I said, two of the characters that will kind of really harness that realm will be Perturabo, and then a character in the Iron Warriors named Hansu, which we'll talk about him later, because he'll be post-heresy. Let's first talk about, let's get started with Perturabo. Purdy,
how's that spelled?
That is Perturabo. Otherwise affectionately nicknamed Peter Turbo.
Okay, love it.
Yeah.
Immediately love that.
Peter, or Purdy,
Peter
as I'll often also say, first landed on the world of Olympia. Now, he was first discovered, at least in like society. Supposedly, he had been like fighting creatures within this period of time. But he was first discovered at some point in like a relative child growth age area, because Primarch growth cycle, confusing and weird. He was discovered climbing the mountains below the city-state of Lokos, with no memory of anything prior. The guards, having realized this was definitely not a normal child, brought him before Damikos, the tyrant of Lokos. Now, Damikos found interest in Perturabo, and this is going to be a big start of something. So, Damikos finds this interest, decides that he is going to raise and treat Perturabo as his son, which he had two of. This is not like, I have no children, therefore this will be my own, which is the case for some Primarchs and their kind of parents. He had to, and he decided to also include Perturabo into this. And now I will note, while there is somewhat a militaristic aspect to some of that upbringing, the tyrant of Lokos, that doesn't mean that that Damikos didn't attempt to, essentially kind of hang out and have a bit of a like father-son relationship with Perturabo at some point. And the thing
did they actually like try to play catch with each other?
They don't say. Well? I didn't see anything specifically, but there's gonna be a thing about that to me, which I'll kind of get to in a second. But young Purdy, he didn't trust the Olympians, kind of for reasons he didn't really even know himself. He kind of just consistently felt that there was just something wrong and he couldn't trust them. And thus, even though one way or the other he was treated as a true part of the family, he was kind of the only one not reciprocating anything and just never returned affection, especially to his father. Really, the thing about this then that I kind of thought of is that it's that realm of like, you look at it and you're like, Perturabo, like this is called the self-fulfilling prophecy, like if you constantly act like you don't trust somebody, eventually they're going to kind of act and treat you in a way that will further that distrust and then might lead to problems.
This was me with half of my bullies in middle school.
Yeah. But then that was the thing, right? Like, so here, I'm going to lay another quick. There's going to be a couple kind of meme things in this episode that we're going to kind of we're going to have to treat with, that realm of salt and like, I don't want to say seriousness, but like honesty.
Is this one a quote directly from the Tyrant of Four Loco, or is this somebody else?
My God. No wonder their strength is they've like boosted their strength to 10.
I'm just saying you're talking about how Peter Turbo couldn't like trust this guy and it becomes something of a self-fulfilling prophecy, and I'm just sitting here like, man, if the Tyrant of Four Loco wanted me to call him daddy, I would also be untrustworthy of what was going on. I'd also be like, and where is the exit?
Sure, but like at the same time, this was like the one way or the other, the culture is like supposed to, from what I recall, it's supposed to kind of be this mix of like, kind of like Athens, Olympia.
Yeah.
But it's kind of this like Spartan Athens mix, because that's the thing, right? Like everybody thinks of ancient Greece and they think the great warriors being Sparta. Well, but like the Sparta one is maybe in some regards close to some of the other legions. And so I think like Athens is really supposed to be the more apt, like comparison. But the thing about, Perturabo is, or in this upbringing, is that essentially he was like raised in a noble family, and he would, hang out with his brothers, and they would try to, you know, just as, I mean, if it was like dueling, they would still try to engage, and it's like, it's not like there was any specific, like, there's no note of like them bullying him or whatever. Like, it's just, he just didn't like him for whatever reason. And, again, so what I was going to get to is, obviously what would become fairly apparent when kind of looking at many things about Perturabo and much of the Iron Warriors is the meme is that the Iron Warriors are the Legion of Autism.
Oh,
because especially
that can really go one way or another,
right,
depending on what they mean by that.
Right. And the big thing on that is, when you think about it, think of engaging with an autistic child, right? When they, and you're a dad, right? And you like football or basketball and whatever, and your autistic son is really into building models, and let's go with the stereotype, let's say he loves model trains, right? You're not really into that though, so you're trying, but you like, the only thing is try to go play ball with your son. Your son doesn't give a shit, because if you know anything about kids growing up with autism, if they don't give a shit about it, the ball isn't
train shaped. Yeah.
If they don't give a shit about it, they'll never give a shit about it. Like, until they decide they give a shit about it, right? Like, but like, if they don't want it, they will not go for it. And, the part of the things that you do to mitigate that is you try to, if anything, if not meet them where they're at, meet them halfway. Right. So this will be a somewhat apt comparison. So let's, for me personally, so you're not, your son isn't into throwing the ball around. Well, maybe you could get them into building model cars. And then if they get into that, maybe you could start funneling that. Maybe you could get into watching, races and motorsports. So you go to NASCAR or IndyCar, you watch Formula One, and then you build models based on those, because they have model cars, they have RCs. There's a bunch of stuff that you could do. But it's a motorsport. It's something. It's a competition. But you're gauging their interest in building, and so you meet them halfway. And nothing tells me that his adoptive father did this in any sense, right? And that maybe is part of it, is that while he just constantly tried to give him his love, take him to fishing trips, Perturabo doesn't care about taking the fishing trip.
So what I'm hearing is that the next time that we hang out in person, I shouldn't ask you if you want to play catch out in the yard. I should instead continue to ask you about your model kits and NASCAR.
Actually, as a kid, I was actually still very into sports. So that really,
okay.
It only was a half decent analogy for myself. However, today, probably. Me at 31, probably, actually, though. Correct. However, despite that, Perturabo shunned most of his siblings, he did enjoy the company of his foster sister, Calliophany.
I was gonna say, yeah, it sounds like maybe
Callipone.
Yeah, I think that's Calliophany.
Yeah, I was starting to gauge it, and I was like, wait a minute.
It's Games Workshop, or whatever, it's them attempting to borrow Greek pronunciation and spelling, so I expect it to be a little bit off.
Within, though, his upbringing and kind of becoming older and more of an adult, and this is still inherently a fairly war-torn, the planet of Olympia was warlord-centric, while Locus was there, Four Loko was
There you go.
um
You got it.
there were still plenty of other city states and whatnot of Olympia. And so war was still an ever present thing, and inevitably it became part of his upbringing. But the apt thing I was getting out with that analogy earlier with Perturabo was, and his adoptive father found this right away, and that noticed the distinct knack for inventing and creating and almost advancing. In fact, inevitably, Perturabo ended up overseeing the constructions of siege weapons that were honestly thought just technologically impossible with what was available to them on the planet. Because while it was, like somewhat modernistic, like I would say probably what I could gauge from it was like more modern in terms of warfare, or like some of the warfare or like devastatingness of weapons than us now, but not by much. And so he was going to this just like complete extra. So like they had guns and everything, and they could build somewhat solid amounts of weaponry, but he like took them to that next level, and just like things that they didn't think were possible. And inevitably, as this leader, Perturabo ended up, just scoring victory after victory, and inevitably was known as a merciless, bloody-handed warlord. Because, granted, you get to his Primarch stature, he becomes an adult, he's big, he's burly, and he is strong. So, and that will, when you are a warrior and a warlord, that turns out are great traits when that's literally what he was designed to be. However, it should be noted that throughout his life, Perturabo was haunted by visions and feelings of a great maelstrom. It's not exactly...
Of course.
This is actually a common thing amongst a number of the Primarchs. And the thing is, it's never clear, and it's dependent on how the Primarchs end up interpreting it. Because, some believe that this is actually like, because some of this maelstrom, these types of visions and feelings and stuff, were written later. So some of it is, some people kind of believe that maybe it's them somewhat knowing about the future that is the Cicatrix Maledictum, right? With the tear in reality. Some look at it as what will become the Horus Heresy, and others choose to ignore it. And Perturabo was in that latter category. He essentially just kind of tried to live with it, brush it off, because he kind of feared that if he told somebody about it, it would be seen as a sign of weakness.
Oh, okay.
So then when the Emperor eventually does arrive to Olympia, Perturabo, pretty no harm, no foul, kind of sees the opportunity. And I think this is kind of where that feeling of distrust maybe was like misplaced, where it's like, I think maybe he knew that this man wasn't his father, but because he didn't have memories of his time before the cliff, he felt that maybe something was wrong. But he always knew that like his father was out there, because that's kind of a common thing for all the Primarchs, is they kind of grow up with this feeling that like they're connected to something somewhere out there. They don't know what. Like for Magnus, he knew because he had this big psychic brain, but not every Primarch has that. So for Perturabo, it's just kind of like this, like, something's wrong. I feel it. This ain't right. That's not my daddy. So, and the idea is, I think that when Perturabo saw the Emperor, he kind of knew that was it. He was the one that he knew was his father. And, kind of threw himself to the Emperor and inevitably worked with, kind of under the, it's not worked with, but under the auspices of the emperor, to out to oust his father and, remove the tyrant of Four Loko from his post. It was kind of actually a big thing where then at his, again, this kind of self-fulfilling prophecy thing, Damokos then is said to have spent the remaining few years of his life gathering forces to attempt to retake his power, but then ultimately failed, but then ended up creating this current of unrest, which we'll come back to later. So inevitably, he betrays his foster father. His foster father comes back. He puts him back down. And then, but it's like that realm of like, were you ever really my son? Like, but it kind of really showcases his continuing lack of empathy too, kind of how quickly he just kind of shoves his father aside, foster father, whatever. So inevitably he does end up getting to his legion, meeting the brothers that were found at the time. It is kind of widely known, and it's like within the community, the whole thing is going to end up being then kind of him versus Dorn, right? He kind of immediately gets this envy of Dorn because Dorn, again, I think if I recall, having kind of be found first, was always inevitably given these reminders that, how Dorn's defenses are perfect. And, he's established the walls of Terra, and he has, set up everything, and he's holding down the fort. And like, that's what Perturabo wanted to be. He wants to show that he can really set up these amazing fortresses and build these awesome things. But he, the common thread will end up being that he just doesn't seem to get that. And Dorn does,
Okay.
So, and we'll kind of circle back to that, right, when we get into the heresy. But we're going to get back to that whole lack of empathy thing. So, immediately upon taking command of his legion, Perturabo reviews all their war records, everything that they've done, how effective they were, their doctrines, their practices, calls them fucking bitches. Just immediately is like, you guys suck. I hate everything that you have done so far. Just no holds barred. Just completely, just like, I am going to hold you to punishment by decimation. And so by lottery, every 1 in 10 legionaries was chosen to be beaten to death by his comrades.
Fun.
Just like,
so
dude,
much fun.
You are so lucky that these guys are just like genetically predisposed to be loyal to you, because holy shit. Like, and that's the thing though, is that ended up really building this blood just loyalty, kind of Stockholm syndrome, obviously, but like it really stood as like those who survived and became, a part of the Iron Warriors, with Perturabo, truly had to ultimately face constant berating, always kind of being told that they're not doing things right. Because the thing is, it's not even to the sense that like Perturabo's plans are bad, but and they're impossible and they can't be defeated. Because in some regards, if Perturabo sets, a somewhat what looks to be an impossible task, he's like a bad DM in D&D, right?
Okay, yeah.
He sets up what kind of almost on its face looks to be like an impossible puzzle or dungeon maze, right? And there's one singular solution, but now he's putting it on you to figure it out. And then when you ask for hints, he just kind of chastises you about it without actually giving you the hint to figure it out. And then when you fail, he makes fun of you for it. And then makes it harder. Bad DM. Don't do that. There's nothing, it's not to say that you can't create a puzzle or dungeon with one solution, but that means that if it's becoming clearly difficult, that you're supposed to help guide them along to it. You know, like help kind of let them figure it out, but give them the tools to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't always do that. So, and that was the thing though, is that like part of it was the reason he would do that was to essentially create this iron will, right? The idea that the warriors that will survive are going to be the ones that will figure it out. And if you came to him just saying, we gave up, we failed, we left, he looked at that as a true ultimate failure and would just just completely freak out on them, kill the leader, and make them beat one guy to death, you know, like some shit like that, you know. Honestly, this is the big thing I was kind of alluding to, whereas like my fear kind of ends up being, and I think doing some looking up and research for this episode, it was mitigated later a bit, but it's kind of one of those things where I was like, man, if this is all you got about learning about Perturabo in that like Iron and the Iron Warriors in that like Horus Heresy 12-book collection they're going to release, it's going to make you really think the Iron Warriors suck ass.
Sure.
You know, because it's not a good look. But again, I'm going to remind you, a big thing about the Iron Warriors is going to become a story of character development. Because see, the thing that we're going to end up getting to here, and I want to make this aside now, is many Primarchs, like especially the Chaos ones, they kind of develop to a point and then stop. And now they are who they are, right? Angron, for example, right? Starts really normal guy. He gets put into slavery. He's got to go into gladiatorial pits. His overlords are pieces of shit. They jam the nail in his head, and this makes him irrevocably angry all the time. It completely warps his psyche. He becomes angrier and angrier and angrier, more bitter and more bitter and more bitter. And then becomes a demon Primarch, and his story or it's like, I should say, his character growth and development kind of ends there, you know. Fulgrim, you know, starts loving the arts, great guy, you know, kind of one way or the other, great guy, still narcissistic, but still like, for Primarchs go, like really chill, honorous guy, you know. You can hang out with him. He's kind of a tool, but like he's still chill enough to hang out with, you know. We've known a person or two like that. Inside jokes are good on a podcast.
Always.
But yeah, like, you know, but then he falls to the layer blade. He starts speaking the song of Slanesh, and then, you know, he becomes hyper conceited and hyper, and just hyper obsessed with perfection. And, you know, then he ascends the demon Primarchhood, and then he ends there, just ultimately constantly seeking perfection. Perturabo does not have that. Strangely enough, while he is constantly looked at as the other side of the coin to Roquadorn, in a way, he's kind of a mirror, like a reflection to Gilliman's story. Story, not personality, story. Because they both start with like a relatively similar upbringing. They both get put into royal houses. Both relatively, one Greek, one Roman. However, Gilliman takes to his family. Perturabo does not. Gilliman gets kind of showered in a lot of early success. Perturabo gets success, but it's embittered with lack of adoration, the ones that Gilliman gets. Gilliman has a great relationship with his parents. Perturabo does not. This coincides then with eventually having a great relationship with the Emperor. Perturabo does not. And then it cycles and it cycles. And so, like, what's funny is now they're almost continue to, like, in 40k in the current lore, they're still kind of opposites, where Gilliman is really sad and depressed because the Imperium sucks, and Perturabo's kind of making a turnaround, But I'll elaborate that on that later, But okay. I want to note, like, it'll become clear when we do talk more about the Ultramarines later, but, like, Purdy really kind of does have an interesting growth comparison to me versus versus Gilliman rather than Dorn, especially because Dorn disappears, Nevertheless, let's get back, time of the Fourth Legion, right? They get their name now, the Iron Warriors. And I will note, they, even before Perturabo was found, were kind of known as blunt, bitter guys. They were the Legion that just kind of did their job, did it as efficiently as possible, and didn't try to make friends with the other legions, really,
Sure.
So realistically, it does kind of seem like the Emperor just kind of built Purdy this way, just kind of built this way. Yeah. So I guess he was predisposed, unfortunately. However, then as time went on, the whole Legion were kind of stereotyped as being the best army for sieges and garrisons, especially sieges. Now, granted, the sieges were pretty strong, and Purdy really wanted to act more, like I said, on how the fists were treated. However, unfortunately, they were constantly strung. They were strung out between worlds, right? The Emperor would kind of designate him to go take over a planet, leave a garrison, which included some Marines, and move forward. And honestly, they just ended up getting really thinned out, and it became harder and harder to do more, to do more sieges and to keep going, because, one way or the other, most legions kind of just got to be able to, like, all right, we've taken over this planet. Here you go, Mechanicum. Or here you go, Auxilia. Now it's in your hands. Onward. And they would just go as a whole unit. The Iron Warriors didn't get this benefit, And this was the Emperor saying to do this. And you could look at this two ways, right? The Emperor trusted him enough to do that. But also it means that he wasn't getting necessarily the job he wanted, and that's tough. And then it really didn't help when there was a particularly vicious campaign where he had to fight the Hrud. They're back. Talking about the Hrud again.
Oh, Paul Hrud, back at it.
And this was in the Soctrata Deeps. This was a region that Perturabo, for all he could see, and generally this is I would take his word on this most of the time. He saw it as strategically useless, but he was dutiful. He was loyal. So he oversaw the purging of the Hrud. And unfortunately, though, because the Hrud are bastards to fight, his legion took heavy casualties, but he was ordered to do so by the War Council. I want to specify, though, now, this order was ordered by the War Council. What this means is actually, because this is nearing the point where Horus is becoming the War Master. Oh. This is like in that period, right? He's kind of getting the dubbing. And, regardless, at this point, Perturabo really only could point the blame at the emperor and kind of thought it was his vanity doing this and having put his sons into this useless campaign, right? However, it honestly very well may have just been Horus who wanted to kind of have his legion in this role, in the role that he would need them to be. And by doing this and kind of framing it in this way, it would be easier to convince Perturabo to follow him and the other kind of chaos legions. And that did end up kind of being a little bit more correct. There we go. So shortly after this, Perturabo learns that Olympia is in rebellion, right? This is not going to be an accurate picture, but it'll actually be relevant later. So he learns that Olympia is in rebellion, right? And so Damokos is dead within this point, right? Mm-hmm. And a number of the city-states kind of started politicking and bickering. So Perturabo is like, hey, he actually goes to the Olympian kind of leaders and is like, hey, you need to enact your own decimation. So kill one of every 10 of your own, or face total extermination and enslavement, right? Just no, you'll be forced. You'll have to forego your government, and you will be entirely essentially put as workers for the Mechanicum, right? And unfortunately, many refused. So Perturabo went on a purging spree in Olympia, going city by city, and honestly just overrunning forces that he had built.
Mm-hmm.
And over 5 million Olympians were killed. And then the rest were put to slavery. Mm-hmm.
Yikes.
And then unfortunately it came to the time where he had to storm the Four Loko Palace. I'm really glad I'm just sticking with this now.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, within this, he came across his old foster sister, Caliphany.
Oh.
And, they had a distinct argument. She blamed him for kind of how things went. She called him a child, called him immature, and was essentially just like, you will not be happy because you feel like you will not be seen unless you put yourself in danger. Right? You put yourself in these terrible sequences because you want to see others you want others to see you putting out such, dangerous and putting yourself in such danger that they will care and that they will see you and be like, hey man, don't worry, man, we got you, man. Don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
We care about you. And I think she struck a nerve. She might have been hitting a little close there. She might have been pretty on the ball. Because he was so perturbed, pun intended.
More like perturbed.
Yeah. He strangled her to death.
Oh, well, okay. Yeah.
And this was the one sequence where Perturabo sheds a single tear.
That doesn't feel big to me. Because, that's all one life one life plus the 5 million other lives of the Olympians that got killed.
Yes.
For a single tear.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate the gravitas of it, for it to even be one tier. Because we're so used to it being in it all, but it's just like not a fair trade.
Yeah. Well, and you know what? You're not the only one to feel that way. There's a lot of people. This is a lot of people's feelings about Perturabo, right? A lot of people will look to him and this stuff and be like, really, dude? That's it? Like, you're going to tell me that hit that hard? But the reality is it did. Olympia essentially died, the world, And he kind of, but this was his, this is his eye awakening, right? Like he's vulnerable, right? That's the key about this right now is he is vulnerable. He's emotionally vulnerable, right? So the gravitas may not hit, but the reality is this is his mindset. And,
Sure.
He, ends up looking out at the world that he's just burning. And he just starts to kind of fully come into that. But here's the thing, right? Like he sheds the tear and now he's also regretting the 5 million, right? Now he's regretting everything about what he's doing, what he's done here. And, essentially, like, he kind of looked at it as like, what saviors of the Imperium are they? They're destroying the HUD moment, and then they're committing genocide on their own people the next. And he felt that the Emperor could never forgive him for what he did. And I'll be honest, he's probably wrong. I don't think the Emperor would have gave a shit. Really. Mm-hmm. I think he would have been like, really, dude? But honestly, Olympia was probably that 2 steps away from being like a Forge World anyway. And so I really don't think the Emperor would have cared. If if anything he would have done is just been like, they're not, just take them out of quote unquote slavery and just put them in the normal working that we have a bunch of our other worlds in right now anyway. Right? Like, that's why I'm like, I don't think he would have cared, because there are other planets that are essentially in the same state. And the Emperor wasn't really being patient about worlds that were rebellious at this point either, So I kind of think he's wrong about that. I don't think the Emperor would have actually cared.
Mm-hmm.
Nevertheless, that's how he feels. Horus, obviously, again, sees that vulnerability, swoops in.
God.
Yeah.
Yeah. Dude, go on. We all know respectively where this is going.
Yeah, so
I'm thoroughly unsurprised.
Yeah.
Horus sees somebody else in a vulnerable state and goes, hey, I can use that.
Hey, I'll let you do what you want, man. And I mean, he gasses him up, man. Like, I mean, he commends him for, being decisive, and eventually, kind of promises him like this big role, the role that the Emperor wouldn't give him, the Dorn role, kind of promises him that, and so he swears his loyalty to him. And, inevitably, which should be noted, interestingly, Horus gives Perturabo a gift after the drop, after Istvan 5, the drop site massacre. Want to guess what that gift is? I don't know if you remember the name of it, but you want to guess what the gift is?
I might not remember what the name of it was.
So I'm going to give you some hints here. It was built by Fulgrim.
Oh, the fucking
Forge Breaker.
Forge Breaker.
Fucking Ferrus Manus dies. The demon version of the demonically possessed, I should say, not demon version, but the demonically possessed Fulgrim, gives Horus Forge Breaker. Horus, kind of, because Horus isn't really chaosified yet, So he kind of looks at Fulgrim and is like, get the fuck out of my office, you stupid asshole.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't want to talk to a demon, like an actual demon.
Mm-hmm.
And takes Forge Breaker and gives it to Peter Turbo.
Oh, no.
And so, funny enough, small aside, apparently at some point, according to what used to not technically be lore, but now is technically lore. Because it's Blood Ravens shit. Apparently at some point the Blood Ravens attained Forgebreaker. Like they just had it for a while.
They just got it for a bit, ended up in their locker. They didn't know what to do with it.
Apparently. But then at some point, Perturabo got it back. So Perturabo still has Forgebreaker. Despite a small break since then to now. And it's kind of within this point, obviously, that, you know, things start to move. Things begin to shift. You know, like the Horus Heresy begins. And this is where there's going to be there's inherently a whole bunch of stuff. So one of the first, and it's going to essentially be a list of the ways that everybody pisses off Perturabo. This is what the Horus Heresy, this is how we're going to go through the Horus Heresy, right? How does everybody piss off Perturabo and the rest of the Iron Warriors? So the first is going to be, we're going to go over there's a whole book to this. It's called Angel Exterminatus. It's a great book for just seeing more things about it, right? Inevitably, what's important here is Fulgrim goes to Perturabo and is like, yo, there's a big power swell in this ancient, you know, essentially Eldar. They don't say that, but initially, but Eldar city, right? They're going into this fight. They have a brief boarding action with some Iron Hands, like remaining, you know, ones that survived. And their ship is called the Sisyphum.
Oh, sure. Probably named after Sisyphean.
Yeah. But it's just funny. The Iron Hands. It's just so funny to me. It's just like they just get shreked at the drop site massacre. Then, you know, all they're doing is just these hit and run shit. They're just trying to survive. And so the ship that tries to engage them literally is called the Sisyphum. It's just so on the nose. It's just so funny.
Was there like a giant rock on the hull of the ship by any chance? Or
God, I want to believe that. I want to believe that's the case. Anyway. So they eventually land on the Crone world. It's inside the Eye of Terror called Idris. And so here it becomes a whole thing. So the Iron Warriors and British children end up fighting, you know, Wraithguard and Wraith Lords that have awoken from their slumber, and like other essentially Eldar ghosts that you see in the bottom left of this picture. And the whole thing about this, we kind of talked about it in the Emperor's Children episode, if you kind of may recall now. There was no like super powerful, you know, special thing. It was just that they could fight a bunch of shit, and Fulgrim was going to use all of this to activate a stone that would let him ascend to demonhood. So that's strike number one against his brothers. Yep. Strike number one against his brothers. Getting tricked to help his brother become Snake Man. So, real pissed about it. Now, granted, Perturabo was close to really getting it done, but unfortunately, those Salamanders, Iron Hands, and Raven Guard showed their faces again, and you know, fucked it all up. Unfortunately, he was able to, while he had had his mortal form gone. He had already ascended to demonhood, and that was over. It was over. From that, though, let's kind of get to let's get into the Siege of Terrell, kind of, and then we'll get into now, right? So this kind of continues to be a somewhat similar trend, and especially Horus really starts to string them along, right? They get to, the Iron Warriors again start feeling overstretched, under equipped, and once again, he starts to make work, and then Horus sends in someone else, or he's got to go babysit somebody, right? And, just try to figure their shit out, get them together so that they can get ready to go on Terra, right? And so, like, for example, there's a point on Ulanor that he has to find Angron. Ulanor, if you don't know, is actually a very historically significant to 40k. It is the planet where the Emperor and many of the Primarchs, including Horus, kind of dealt with the biggest and kind of almost what was for a long time the last orc threat in the Imperial space, right? That was kind of the biggest concentration, and after that, orcs were pretty much non-existent in Imperial space. And that was from that fight that the Emperor felt that he was in a position to go back to work on the Webway project and then put Horus in charge without telling him about the Webway project. So Perturabo and Horus have to meet there. And so first he has to find Angron, then bring him to Ulanor. Then they get into because again, they can't deal with shit. So, eventually Perturabo and Angron get in a fight with each other. Perturabo is at least able to survive and go to him enough to just kind of work with him and just kind of uses his essentially almost kind of mind slavery to Khorne against him.
Mm-hmm.
And from there they're able to at least kind of get out and get moving. I will note that we'll talk about it in a minute, but this is actually where we'll see the first of a type of Chaos Space Marine called an Obliterator.
Oh.
Yeah. And like I said, we'll get to that later. For now, let's kind of get to the Siege of Terra. Because there's a shit ton that goes on here, so I really have got to just cliff notes this for you here, right?
That's
so
fine.
Yeah. So this starts, right? Perturabo's whole benefit to this, and the Iron Warriors too, they all feel this way, where it's like, yes, we get to do brother versus brother, Iron Warrior versus Imperial Fist, because they had been compared so often for so long. This was their time. Who is better, And honestly, at the beginning, it kind of felt like when everybody was kind of following Perturabo's, kind of way, they were doing really good. They were kind of holding up. But the problem again, getting back to this whole thing, he would set up a move. Horus would veto it or move it over because he was War Master and tell his Iron Warriors to go somewhere else, right? But then here's what would happen. These plans that started to work, when he would have them move out, they would fail. So now you've kind of got this consistent, like, chasing the tail and it never getting anywhere. And Horus is almost kind of shooting himself in the foot at this point, but almost kind of due to this sense of pride. But then also, this is kind of at a point where Horus has really started to just become more and more chaos juiced, And Perturabo begins to notice this, you know? He begins to kind of see that, like, you know, he kind of sees that, like, you know, these plans are failing. Horus has essentially just become a full chaos simp, you know, and he sees all of these other space marines who are, you know, warped in some way, or these demons that have been summoned to the battlefield. And he's like, this isn't what I wanted. This isn't the Legion versus Legion pure mano y mano I truly wanted. And then, after the whole Saturnine Gate debacle, the Horus informed Perturabo that he was to disperse his Iron Warriors amongst various war zones, and that his position, kind of leading Saturnine, was going to be taken by Mortarion. That was it. The last thing that he needed to be told was that this potential attack that was going to be start working, you know, it was only a bit of a setback at Saturnine, but he had a plan. He was going to move in on it. You're out. Mortarion's it.
Yeah.
That was it. He's like, this is bullshit. So he flew to his flagship, the Iron Blood, and kind of just began orbiting Mars and just kind of watched as the rest went. And, you know, he got pretty pissed. I mean, he honestly was kind of at the point where he was like, I think I'm going to kill Horus when he wins. Because he still felt that Horus was going to win, right? However, this is kind of when that thought process starts to kick in. Maybe I need to shift myself a bit more, right? But let's first talk about, you know, so thus now we can get into the Iron Warriors kind of go from the Horus Heresy to these kind of standard, you know, very not Chaos Marines at all, to dabbling a little bit in the sauce. So obviously, to start, right, they you know, they end up having to flee, kind of start heading towards the iron, you know, the Eye of Terror, Eye of Terror.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the biggest things that happened within this period is, you know, the biggest thing they wanted to do first was they actually wanted to defend a bit of their stuff within Imperial space, right? They had this quote unquote like Empire of Iron. And it was working for a good while because, again, they're really well defended and very good at what they do. You know, it took both Imperial Fists and Ultramarines to fight over just Olympia itself over 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
However, unfortunately, when they kind of saw that it was starting to get to the bad point, the Iron Warriors decided, fuck it. If we can't have Olympia, no one can. And they triggered all of their missile stockpiles and glassed the planet.
Of course.
The bitterness doesn't go away, unfortunately.
Not at all.
At this point, though, all emotional ties to Olympia were gone, you know, for Perturabo especially. But some of this was honestly just even like the various, you know, Iron Warriors themselves. These weren't just specifically Perturabo, right? Like a lot of these planets were just being defended by commanders and legionaries of the Iron Warriors, right? And, you know, knowing that he's kind of end up really having to make this kind of fallback. We don't have any pictures of this, but what ends up happening is the Iron Warrior, Perturabo kind of devises a plan. So he kind of creates this trap in, which is called the Eternal Fortress, which was kind of this, you know, this kind of area on the planet Sebastus 4, where it was just this 20 square mile area of just bunkers, towers, minefields, trenches, tank traps, anything, And this was kind of this idea, right? That this was the idea that like, we're here, come get us, Dorn. And Dorn's like, fuck you, I'm coming.
Yeah.
He would quote unquote dig out Perturabo out of his hole and bring him back to Terra in an iron cage.
Whoa.
This thus became known as the Iron Cage Incident.
Okay.
Unfortunately, the honorable battle that Dorn was expecting did not happen. And in fact, essentially, Perturabo had set it up so that 4 companies of Imperial Fists that landed would be isolated from each other, and then Perturabo would continue to divide them up and just take them out piecemeal. And while some were kind of able to penetrate the defenses, the reality is there was no true. This wasn't the central keep. This was just an open space watched by more defenses. It was a decoy. It was essentially like, get them to the fortress, and then the fortress will have a bunch of guns pointing inward and just blow up whoever runs inside. At this point, it ended up, they were so locked into this fortress and trapped in it that they essentially had to just resort to using the bodies of their battle brothers for cover.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So they really only survived because they got backup from Gilliman and the Ultramarines. However, at this point, there was enough sacrifice of over 400 loyalist Marines, and they're specifically notes their gene seed. I guess that matters. Anyway, this allowed Perturabo to do one thing that most thought unthinkable, and many still do think unthinkable, which is his ascension to Demon Prince of Chaos Undivided.
Okay.
The question now that sits on this is, why did he do that? He was a staunch atheist. He hated the Chaos Gods. He hated them for what they did to his brothers. But some of the thought is likely that Perturabo kind of sees the ends justify the means kind of scenario. And I think he finds himself in that same predicament that Horus did. Because the thing about Horus was he also looked at the Chaos Gods and said, I don't like you.
Yeah.
But you showed me the truth. And so I will reward that by giving you this bit of hand, letting you, because you hate the Emperor. I now hate the Emperor. We can work together for now. And then his idea was, I'll betray him later. But that never happened. I don't think it was ever gonna. And I think in some regard, I do think that Perturabo felt that he could do better. And as we'll talk about later, he might have. But regardless, following that and seeing the objective completed, and especially a victory over the Imperial Fists, he felt that it was time to go, and he retreated back into the Eye of Terror, where then he would find and crown their homeworld in the Eye of Terror called Medjugorje.
Medjugorje. Ooh.
Yes. And this is the home and the current home of the Iron Warriors. And what's really important about the Iron Warriors in this time is they are truly one of the only Chaos Space Marine legions that truly are still a legion. The only other one, I should say, that's in the same vein as them is the Word Bearers. You know,
so like they've stuck together. They're not like integrated into the other Chaos Space Marines. They've like
I mean, some of the like we'll call those warp smiths, which are the ones that especially like specialize in the demon engines and all that. You know, they do help the Black Legion and will like ally and whatnot and move over there or do whatever, but like one way or the other, the Iron Warriors as a legion still stands. And that's attributed to this whole iron within, iron without, and everything about it, They are a legion. And while Perturabo's done and treated them pretty poorly a lot of times, they're brothers to each other, and Perturabo is their Primarch. And all of what they had done and sacrificed bred that loyalty. Whereas versus like say something like the Night Lords, while technically the Night Lords as a legion exist still, they're not unified. They're very scattered. They often will just, work with one of them will be like the warlord of a band of them, of like other Night Lords. And so there's just a lot of things to that, so they're still a legion, yeah, but they're not together. The Iron Warriors are together a lot. They just seem separate sometimes, but that's just because, again, a leader takes their band out, goes to complete an objective, takes it back to Medrengard. That's the key part. The taking it back to Medrengard. Groups like the Iron Warriors keep it for themselves. And only themselves. I think I said Iron Warriors again. I meant Night Lords. Anyway. There, though, Perturabo has remained, and they continue just to fight in the Long War, as it is called, by all Chaos Space Marines, which is all of the fighting past the Horus Heresy. Right?
Okay, so it's everything from the Horus Heresy until now.
Yes, the Chaos Space Marines call that the Long War. Everything from then to now. Because giving them
not an inaccurate title, I'll give them that.
Yes, but also that's the thing, right? Is for some of them, this is still only maybe a couple hundred years in their perspective because of the way time gets all funky wonky in the Eye of Terror. Ooh, sorry. All right, well, so let's talk for a moment about the specific types of Iron Warriors that you can find, especially ones that are special to them. And the first one of them is the Warsmith, which is essentially like your main leader or like commander of, any unit or army or whatnot, right? Captain Titus, or I would say it's closer to something like a Captain Titus, not really like Marnius Kalgar, because like there are a distinct number of warsmiths. So not where there's only technically one chapter master in every legion chapter, whatever. So that's kind of why. Or the thing with that. But these are, amongst the grand companies of the Iron Warriors, these are generally the keenest minds, and they always specifically specialize in both, essentially the arcane mechanical lore. So very similar to like what a tech marine is for normal space marines, but with a little bit of chaos twinge. They'll have demonically infused bionic augments, and sometimes they'll even like utilize twisted mechanical appendages of the obliterators, which we'll talk later. But yeah, so every warband leader takes the title of Warsmith, and so I guess it does say here that they technically are similar to the post of Chapter Master. I guess when you think about it, if you take just the Iron Warriors and each warband is like a chapter of, say, like the Ultramarines, even though there are many types of chapters of Ultramarines, like Nova Marines, Ultramarines, whatever, I guess in that scenario it is similar because they do have captains beneath them. One of the unique things about a Warsmith, though, as a leader, other than just being, again, the tech savviness and all that, is that they often will retain command of a grand company even after being interred into a chaos dreadnought. Not necessarily a hell brute, but a chaos dread, put it into a dreadnought. And this is a good time to make a note. Chaos dreadnoughts, like being a dreadnought to the Chaos Legions and like, or Marines or whatever, it's not an honor like it is for the loyal Marines, right? You know, like it gets looked at as like, you know, that character that you like hang out with for like 5 minutes in Space Marine 2. You remember? He gets blown up.
I do. Yeah.
Yeah, he gets blown up right before the Thousand Suns show up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they mentioned he's getting put into a dreadnought.
Yes,
like
yes, that's right.
You know, enough of him is there that he can get put into a dreadnought. And that's an onerous thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's not for a Chaos Space Marine.
Oh.
The biggest reason is chaos or dreadnoughts as a whole kind of get put into a very difficult psychological realm, right? So, I mean, think of it this way, right? You're a guy and you're just kind of floating there in this temporal liquid that's keeping you alive. And all you can look out through is digital readouts and a small slit of an eyepiece, right?
Yeah.
For your actual physical look out of your dreadnought. At some point, it really starts to hit you. Especially for some of them, they get like really weird cases of like phantom limb syndrome. And they start to lose it. The way that they mitigate that though is what they do is they put dreadnoughts to sleep. You know? You go to sleep for like 100, 200, 300 years. And you wake up and as far as you know, that 300 years ago was yesterday. So like all that psychological stuff doesn't really hit you because you were asleep. You don't really know what happened. You know where you are and who you are and all that. It's just like, you know.
Yeah, of course.
The passage of time is meaningless in that scenario, right? So for Chaos Space Marines, it's different because they don't put you to sleep. So now you're getting two things. You are getting lambasted by often the horrors of chaos and all the things that are implied with that. And then all of those negative aspects of being in a dreadnought, you face way sooner than any of your loyal counterparts. And so it's looked at as a punishment. It is the idea that like they are doomed and they cannot fight the way that they could. They're doomed for psychosis and it's a living nightmare. And then if you become a hellbrute, it's even worse because you essentially become so psychotic and mutated and warped. You can't even speak. You can't do anything.
Yeah.
You're just a beast in a cage. However, Iron Warriors, little different. That culture isn't there as much. It's still because again, they're kind of this, you're looking at this mix of kind of like, Chaos Iron Hands / Chaos Imperial Fists. Lots of tech, lots of fortress building, And so the warsmiths are really important. And specifically, there is one warsmith that is incredibly important. And that is that of Hansu. Hansu has a very interesting backstory. He actually is built from he is built from two gene seeds.
What?
So, yeah. So he was an experiment of one good old Fabius Bile. So Fabius took gene seed from quote unquote honorable Sulaka, an Iron Warrior's apothecary during the heresy.
Mm.
Specifically murdered by Fabius Bile.
Funny how those things work out.
Who then decided, I'm going to try to meld this gene seed with an Imperial fist, likely the Captain Felix Cassander. And there was an accident. This is kind of a dumb part of the story. There was like an accident in Bile's laboratory, and the container holding Sulaka's gene seed was partially defaced, and thus only the words remained on the jar, Hansu. It's really dumb. Anyway, so he gets kind of looked at though as a half breed, right? Especially his half fists. The other Iron Warriors don't like that. That's what a loser. So what ends up being the case in this actually though is that he still is able to, he still works through. He still starts to rise through the ranks of his grand company, and they end up working on another siege. We're heading back to Hydra Cordatus.
Time to siege again.
Yep. It doesn't say like which, if this is like the third or the fourth or the second siege of Hydra Cordatus. Doesn't really say. But he is essentially one of three champions of the Warsmith, who is just known as the Warsmith, Barb Falk. And while, he was in roughly an equal place of his other two kind of champions, he was denied the formal rank of captain. Literally, he was allowed on the console, but he was not gifted the rank of master.
Rank of master, yep. Same thought.
Literally, it is literally that. But he hoped that he could win that rank by going through this siege, right? He's like, I think that by taking part in this, I will prove my worth. And in a way, he's right. Because as they kind of, get inside the fortress, which was designed by Barb Falk during the heresy, it held a large, stable supply of Imperial Fist gene seed. And so essentially, essentially trying to build the same thing that Perturabo built. No, sorry. The same thing that Fulgrim built. And kind of utilizing the idea of how Perturabo ascended to demonhood, right? So it's like a mix of the two. Location of Fulgrim, practice of Perturabo. They begin to they have to fight back against Imperials that catch wind of what's going on and try to stop it. Here is where Hanzo loses his right arm. However, he was inevitably victorious in that fight. So the Warsmith actually ended up looking at berating Forix, one of the captains, for failing to breach parts of the fortress to get in, so to get like into there. The other champion, Kroger, was berated for failing to protect the Iron Warriors' heavy siege guns during the counterattack. So the only one that got praise was Hansu, because he was given his job and he succeeded. He lost an arm, sure, but he succeeded. And thus the siege was successful, and the warsmith became a demon himself.
Okay.
So not a greater demon, but like a demon prince. And thus he pulled I've ascended to demonhood. So long, my brothers. I am better than you now. Also, Hansu, you're in charge now. Peace. And thus, Hansu became a warsmith himself, despite his half-breed heritage. All right, now here comes the thing. Can't talk about any of them without talking about something called the Demon Kulaba.
The Demon Kulava.
B at the end there.
Kulaba. Demon Kulaba. Nope. No idea.
Okay. It's the veritable 40k boogeyman story. It's the thing everybody points to, like, you think you're getting into Warhammer? You think
Hook hand
cool?
Cardor?
Wait until kinda feels that way.
Oh boy.
Wait until you hear about the Demon Kulaba. Here's the thing, right? It's fucked up. I'm gonna be very clear. It is super fucked up. It is a disturbing concept in every way you can imagine it. Thinking about it is in fact disturbing. That's not untrue. Is it explicitly the worst thing ever, even in Warhammer? I would argue no. I would argue Skaven broodlords are a little bit even more disturbing. Or broodmothers. But regardless, we got to talk about it. Because if I don't talk about it, I feel like I'll be eviscerated for it. So,
Okay.
after the success of Hydra Cordatus, Hansu ended up sending the claimed gene seed to Abaddon the Despoiler. And a lot of this is meant to be because currently the way a lot of Chaos Space Marines are made is they kind of do it in somewhat the old-fashioned way, but it's a little less successful, right? Anybody could die trying to have the surgery to become a Space Marine done to them. For Chaos Space Marines, it's even more likely because apothecaries or doctors are few and far between, especially with ones with knowledge of the process. So it's really likely a lot of times that you will die in the process of becoming, a normal, like, average Joe to becoming a Chaos Space Marine, right?
Sure.
But they still need the gene seed to do that. So and that part of that objective to better that process is actually one of Fabius Bile's main goals. Hansu thought to make try his hand at a solution, right? So he kept some of the captured gene seed and began manufacturing the Demon Kulaba. It's not perfect, but let me just describe it here. So it's a system where they will take human female slaves, just force feed them nutrients, kind of just put them in these cages and just force feed them, fattening them to these just grotesque proportions, kind of forcing them to be alive, right? He then would turn these women into birthing wombs where essentially insides would be altered and their chemistry would be wired, and inevitably they would take the gene seed into these babies that they would or not even babies, sorry, into these adolescents that they would shove into the women and kind of utilize this womb to have them essentially birth an Astartes. The problem was, generally half of the time, what ended up being created was a gigantic abomination, which was called the Unfleshed, which were just these mutant creatures that just kind of, I mean, let me see, like, where's a good, I didn't grab it, but like, where's a good, like, essentially, yeah, they're just like Space Marine-esque bodied humanoids, but they were disfigured and largely without skin. So it's great.
Neat.
Yeah. And yeah, they inevitably get inevitably they get so the idea is essentially if they get rejects and failures, they get chucked out into the Fortress sewer system. This is all in Medjugorje, by the way. Inevitably, a big thing about Hansu is the reason he is partly what becomes that villain of the week thing with an ultramarine named Uriel Ventress. Uriel is a bunch of books, very popular character, often facing off against the machinations of Hansu, right?
Okay.
And at some point, Uriel actually gets trapped inside a Damankalaba, which I don't want to imagine how the fuck that worked.
It sounds awful.
But it did apparently extract some portion of his gene seed and memories. And it did create a small clone of him called the Newborn, which is a current active like Chaos Space Marine of the Iron Warriors. Or at least was. They're dead now, but Uriel took him out. It was, again, all part of a book. But yeah. Yeah, so that's the Damankalaba.
I hate it if my tone wasn't clear enough before. Hate all that.
It's bad. Like, it's, look, nothing changes that it's disturbing, bad, and gross, but that's it. That's all we have about it. It's a dark, disgusting, gross thing, but like, it's not like they're everywhere. In fact, most of them have been destroyed at this point. So as far as we know, like, most of them, they're not really even utilizing this at this point. So it's kind of like a thing of the past now. I'm not entirely sure about the accuracy to that last part I mentioned, but that's what I saw and recalled being a thing. But yeah, like, just, yeah. The final thing about Hansu that is very important, though, is here's where we get to truly see kind of the final leg of the Iron Warriors, character circle, right? So we talked about the fact that they kind of started pretty rough. They're really blunt. They're not really friendly. They kill when they shouldn't, or they don't have to. They're quick to anger. Perturabo especially, right? Then, they get into the heresy, almost kind of in a thought that this will help redeem them for their actions. Obviously, it was a lie, but still. Then, he just ends up being abused essentially by his brothers. They just take him for granted. They utilize his skills and the rest of the Iron Warriors' abilities to just further their own selfish means, and essentially end up sabotaging the plans for the siege of Terra.
Mm-hmm.
And so he takes his ball and goes home and ends up being very successful. You know, he continues to attempt to dethrone the Imperium, having that feeling that he could run the Imperium better than his dad did. You know, sure, losing the plot a little bit every now and then, but, you know, maybe he has shown some resiliency to the machinations of chaos, despite being a demon lord, you know? And a good example of this is when Hansu has to go back. He has to go to Medjugorje. He has to face Perturabo. And he has to tell Perturabo that he's failed. Now, Hansu, I should note, is a very confident man. He truly believes in himself. He truly believes that, you know, he could have been successful, you know, if things had gone the right way, had such and such not happened. Kind of similar, honestly, to his dad, you know? Half dad, I guess, technically. But right, not too dissimilar. And Perturabo goes to him, or he goes to Perturabo, and Perturabo, you know, asks him for what happened. He gives him a description. And there's like the main honor guard for Perturabo there. And what's funny is, like, in talking about it, he actually kind of notes mentally to himself, like, oh, he's gonna get it. This just cocky half breed, right? Is gonna get his shit rocked, you know? Like, he fucked up taking over Ultramar. You know, he couldn't take it. Like, he's fucked. He's going to get killed. Perturabo is going to destroy him. You know what Perturabo does?
No, what's he do?
He invites him to play Warhammer.
What?
So it's not called Warhammer, obviously. I forget the name. It's a different name, but it's inherently like a kitschy thing for its GW kind of having like what is it called? No. Fuck. I'm trying to remember. I was hoping it'd be easier to find there. It's not. But yeah, so, you know, he invites him to essentially play a game of Warhammer. It's a war game that was played amongst some of the other Primarchs as well, and others of, I don't know if he took it from Olympia or not. But yeah, so he he essentially sets up what is supposed to be an equivalent scenario to his plans for sieging Ultramar, right?
Okay.
And the whole time he's essentially asking him, and he kind of tells him, he's like, we're going to play 5 rounds. And if I don't like what I see after 5 rounds, I'm going to kill you. Right? So that's what he's leading in with. So Perturabo's leading in with. And so, you know, he's like, okay, you know, we're gonna deal this out. So he goes through, you know, Hansu and Perturabo go through, Hansu loses. But this whole time, Perturabo's asking him, like, you know, why did you do this? Why'd you do that? You know, and Hansu gives him very stoic, very short answers. And one of the things he denotes to him is, and, you know, Hansu's being kind of sassy through the whole thing, right? Like, he's kind of giving him attitude. And this is that whole thing where, like, again, that honor guard is kind of like, yo, this fucking kid, he's going to get his shit rocked. And he keeps asking him questions, though. And he's like, one of the things he gets to is like, you know, he tells him, you let your emotions get to, you let your obsessiveness over Uriel Ventress control your desire. Where if you had instead, you know, done this move or whatever, you would have won. You could have taken over Calth or parts of Ultramar or whatever. You know, that world could have been yours. Now rack them up again, you know, kind of, they're playing this game and he's probing the mind of Hansu. And this is something that Perturabo we never saw him do.
Mm-hmm.
He just wouldn't sit there and play Warhammer with his sons, you know? He'd kick their ass, but he wasn't doing that. And the key thing, you let your emotions take advantage of you. Hanzo knows about his dad, knows his history. He asks him, he says to him, can't you say that you've done the same thing? And Perturabo responds with, yes, I did. And I paid the price for it. I have learned these lessons. And now I am better for it. And now I succeed. And they continue playing. And like, he is at this point where he is admitting, like, yeah, I've made my mistakes. That's why I have to pass it along to you. I have to take my mistakes that I've made in my life and teach you these lessons so that you can be successful. This isn't the Perturabo that gave one of his biggest captains, gave him bad news about someone else. So this guy is just total messenger and chucks the guy across the room and kills him.
Yeah.
Same guy, like same Primarch who did that to that poor messenger, is suddenly here looking at his son who had essentially ended up being a botched attempt to invade Calth, and is teaching him lessons. Is not berating him, is a little, but like in a way of trying to shape him, trying to make him better at his job. And that's just unheard of. And here's the thing. He sets up like this final engagement. It's supposed to be like this impossible thing. Remember that analogy I gave earlier about the bad DM?
Yeah.
He gives him a scenario. There is one way to succeed. Can you find it? But what he does, he doesn't give him hints, but what he tells him is take everything that we have talked about. Because the key he tells him is, he says, I have had so many, earlier he mentioned to him, I have had so many failed commanders, captains, and whatnot. Why? Because they fight the way that they fight in a way that they think I want them to fight. They fight how they think I want them to fight. But they never fight the way that they want to. And what he clearly respects about Hansu is that he never does that. But that means that his fighting style does need to be refined, and thus this lesson that he's in. So he gauges him in all these lessons about, knowing his opponent, utilizing his opponent's weaknesses against them. Don't let your emotions allow them to take advantage of yours. All those lessons. And tells him there is a way. Find it. Use the lessons. All of the hints that I've given you. You can find it. And he does. It, he has to sacrifice a number of units, and it's, it isn't a perfect victory, but it's a victory. He wins the game. And you know what the mock-up that this battle was?
What was it?
It was a mock-up of the siege of Cadia.
Oh.
And he kind of does, it's funny. They kind of do like the movie thing where it's like, he's like, he kind of clearly gives him the "you're not going to die today" thing, and kind of like does the thing where it's like he turns over, he's like, "Take a look at this," and he opens the door, and there's just the fucking just onslaught and just like thousands upon thousands of tanks and like fighters and whatever, And he's like, we're gonna do some work with Abaddon. He's got a plan for Cadia, and I think you're ready for it. Unfortunately, again, it's just like, even though that story exists, we don't get to see Purdy yet in actual 41st Millennium. But that's their growth story. However, there's one thing I mentioned earlier that we were going to talk about before the end here, and that's the Obliterator virus.
Yes.
I want to talk about it here because it first affected an Iron Warrior. So this is kind of a warp-based virus. It's a almost biomechanical virus. Obliterators are essentially largely Iron Warriors, but any Marines can be Obliterators. Often these are former tech Marines of some kind, which is why the Iron Warriors get affected so much. But this contagion essentially begins to like fester inside of them. And then, they become obsessed with the pursuit of technological and alchemical knowledge. And then the virus itself begins to take fold. It sears their flesh to the armor. And they just, it grows them, and they just become these like behemoths. Like they're even bigger than Terminator armored Space Marines. Now, some believe that this was created by the Dark Mechanicum, but not much is known about its origin. But the biggest thing is that it also merges the carriers with whatever they're holding. So weapons, and it merges it into their flesh and steel. And so what they end up being able to do is spawn the ammunition and the weapons themselves like through their arms or whatever. And they can just create ammunition from the flesh and steel in their bodies. And because they absorb metals as they move, as they go anywhere, as they do whatever, right? So thus they're also very bulky and thick and hard to kill. If you couldn't gauge that by looking at him.
Yeah.
So the thing is, usually, it's not very common, right? Like it doesn't happen super frequently, but when they happen, legions often really push for them. We actually saw Obliterators in the Lion Book. He fought them in like that when they all went into the substation to like get that power and the radio and all that back on. If you recall that.
Yeah.
You can kind of remember they like talked about how like the weapons would come from nowhere. And they just seemed so unkillable.
Mm-hmm.
It was obliterators. And so the thing is, though, it is, there's not much more that I could remember or find to it, but there are, there's some sentiment that it is inherently, contagious, but inherently it's one of those kind of things where like it ends up just kind of being something where it can kind of just happen to anybody. But I will go over quick. There are 9 stages of infection. So stage 1, there are no obvious effects, but they are a carrier, so the disease can spread. Which is why I guess it does seem sometimes like there is so few, because stage 1 could last a long time or forever if they die, right? Stage 2, they now find themselves a little bit more at home with their weapons. Their aim increases, and it's just the gun really seems to fit well in the hand. Stage 3 is where they start to begin finding themselves merging with weaponry if they hold it for too long, and they kind of notice that they're generating the ammunition for that weapon all of a sudden. This is kind of like where it starts to become clear, like, oh shit. And at stage 4, is kind of when they've hit obliterator. Their armor is, no longer removable. It can seemingly repair itself, but their, movement is impaired. Their joints meld and thus have to rearrange with the metal of the armor. They get gross. Stage 5 is when they could absorb small weapons such as knives, pistols, and recreate their own at will. Stage 6 is the flesh is now truly a demonic melding of the flesh and skin, metal and skin, and thus they can absorb more complex weapons like bolters and all that. Stage 7 is when they get a little bit more strength and fortitude. They're much heavier. Stage 8 is now they can create more than just weapons. They can include bionic limbs and organs. The flesh and metal are just truly indistinguishable at this point. And then the final stage sees the fully fledged obliterator using the heaviest weapons that it can absorb and just completely just thickened out. The obliterator virus, funny enough, though, can actually corrupt Tyranid bioships. It can go into their neural pathway and severing them from the hive mind.
Yeah.
So, funny enough, they would go super hard at fighting the Tyranids.
Does that happen often?
Not enough, because, while they're growing, the obliterator cults grow, they're still just not around enough. There's not enough of them.
Okay.
And it's hard to know when anybody is stage 1, arguably, for example, the whole Iron Warriors Legion could probably be within the thralls of being at stage 1, right? And they just don't know it yet. There are so many of that. It's just, you never know. But otherwise, that's pretty much it for the Iron Warriors. At this point, they have their many war bands, but one way or the other, they're kind of all one way or the other working to build their own, build their empires into real space, defeat the Imperium, especially fuck up places in Imperial Nihilus, because they're so cut off from the rest of the Imperium, and build their fortresses. And one day, Perturabo will show up. And it'll be great. Maybe.
It'll be
Depends how you
something
look at it.
either way, good or
It
bad.
depends how you look at it, There's a lot of people that obviously don't like the idea of all the Primarchs coming back to the setting. I'm very in the middle on that argument. I would like some, because I like that it's very clearly like truly demonic humans versus normal humans, And inevitably, most of the loyalists are like, enough of them are dead, and then enough are going to be tough to find or justify coming back or whatever. Like, it'll be fine. I think it's okay, because I think that a lot of them will come back very different, and that's what I think will be cool about it. But I'm in the middle. It doesn't have to be fast. That's my way of looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's the Iron Warriors. They may be pretty petulant in much of their time, but they're really good at their job, and they just don't get the appreciation for it. So they, you know what? They'll do it themselves. And you got to admire that, Any questions, though, about the Iron Warriors?
No, I think they're weird. I think they're dang ass freaks, if I may be so bold.
I can't say it's entirely wrong, but I mean, look. I've shown you this picture before. I'll show you again. It's one of my favorite Iron Warriors images. But I mean, yeah, they have like this guy.
That's a great metal album cover right there. Yep.
Oh my God, though, is it? It's like it so is. Like it's just like there's so much gun to this gun that he needed to make more gun. My gun didn't have enough gun, so I had to add flamer to my gun. But then my gun needed a magazine, but I also wanted it to be belt fed, so I added 2 guns so that I could have one with the magazine and one with the belt feeder. And then on top, I needed to have a plasma launcher on my shoulder, but I still needed my hook hand, so I have my needle hand, my grabber claw. Like, it doesn't end with this guy.
Trying to give the gun devil a run for his money.
All right. Well, if you've got nothing else, I think we can get ready to roll on that.
Cool.
So, next week, we're going to get a little bit more chaotic. And here's the thing. I'm sure there's a bunch of people out there who probably are like, yo, how are you going to have this month of chaos and you're not going to have an episode? And like the next episode's got to be the Black Legion, right? My answer is we know about the Black Legion. We got to talk about the Word Bearers, the true winners of chaos.
As in they're the most chaotic or they're the best at it?
Both.
Great.
I mean, they're the ones that were the first to truly devote to chaos,
Mm-hmm.
Black Legion, one way or the other, mainly just cares about itself, destroying the Imperium. If we're going to have Chaos Month, we need truly to talk about the heretics. The first heretic, some would say.
Mm.
So it's going to be a fun one. It's going to be somewhat similarly loaded. So it'll be, again, fairly abridged, but still about as long as this even was. So if that tells you what's what's under the hood and could be dived into more, that'll tell you.
So strap in. We're gonna bear a lot of words.
Oh wait. All right. Until next time. I'll see you later.
Goodbye.